Rock on. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. It is another Tuesday, which means it's time for Weekly Whiskey. So thank you for coming on out. If you are drinking something good, if you're drinking something great, if you're drinking something terrible, go ahead and let us know in the comments. Personally, I'm pretty jammed. We've got good stuff to drink tonight. We've been drinking some good stuff, some bad stuff, some crazy stuff. But it's good to have you all here.
Stuff.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's always crazy. It's always crazy at Weekly Whiskey headquarters, but we've got some good stuff here. Go ahead and drop on in the chat. We love to see you guys. But in the meantime, how you doing, John?
I'm doing well, buddy. How are you? You look like you're doing well. Great haircut. I like it. Like what I see. You look good in those Mackie headphones as well.
Hell yeah, that is an excellent segue. Weekly Whiskey is brought to you by Mackie. Mackie is our audio partner here. They are making us sound great. I like to think that we bring the looks to the table, but the gear looks pretty good too. So if you're curious about the pro sound, go ahead and check out Mackie. We've got pretty much a pretty good studio worth of gear here. We're pretty pumped about. But I think, what do you say? Should we dive on to some barrel news?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's hit up a little bit of the single barrel program news and get everybody up to speed.
Hell yeah, it has been a crazy busy week here. We have a Wilderness Trail distilled on 4/20/2017 barrel. It is currently available. Pretty cool. This is the first time we actually have remaining inventory to talk about publicly instead of just like, whoop, there it went. So
this is kind of exciting.
I mean, this is literally 18 months in the making. I finally woke up and was like, not out of stock.
They're not all gone yet.
Yes.
We did it.
If you are interested, we had an amazing episode. There's really no other word to use other than amazing episode with Dr. Pat Heist over at Wilderness Trail. So if you're interested in what they're doing, you can go ahead and check the show notes for information on that selection. Also up is our Knob Creek Brain Drain. This is a 9.5-year Warehouse Z, which is one of the funkiest warehouses I found from Knob Creek. Super fun, as well as 3 Starlights. So things are bumping, things are hopping. We'll have all your info in the comments. But what do you say? Should we drink some whiskey?
Let's drink a little whiskey. So tonight we're going to be joined by Nick Taylor from Found North Whiskey. Yeah, we're going to hear a little bit about their story. We're going to taste through their blended whiskey as well as their... Is it actually classified as a rye?
Yes,
it is. We've got a rye and a Canadian whiskey. This is going to be pretty fun stuff, guys. I hope you're excited about it because I am definitely, especially the high age statement we've got here. So without further ado, here is Nick from Found North. Nick, how are you, sir?
What's up, guys? I got to tell you, I was very much jamming out to your intro music.
Right?
I just got married on Saturday, and we had an incredible DJ, and all day I've been blending batches 3 and 4, and so I like to listen to music when I'm blending and just sort of tune out the world. And I got to tell you, you're gonna send me that track. I'm just gonna add it to my blending playlist. It was pretty fun.
I could do that for you, man.
Yeah.
No, seriously.
We'll just keep the party going.
Yeah, I'm for it.
J Payne. Oh my god.
That is my stage name, but we don't need to talk about that.
I thought it was motherfucking Jones.
No, that's my alter ego is motherfucker Jones.
Oh, cool. Well, this is it's great to have you, Nick. Congratulations on your wedding. What better way to celebrate than drinking obviously more whiskey? I'm sure you've had your share in the last couple of days, but
yes.
We're excited with what we have in front of us. So why don't you catch us up real quick? What is Found North? Who are you? What are you doing with it? And what has kind of brought us to having these bottles on the table here today?
Yes. Well, God, man, it's always hard to figure out where to start with this. With COVID, we kind of had an interesting opportunity to take a shot at starting a brand. We had been doing some importing. We had been doing some brand ambassador work. And that all went up in smoke when we couldn't do tastings and we couldn't do sales and we couldn't go up, into stores or anything like that. And we kind of had a do or die moment and figure out what to launch. And this was March of 2020. Fortunately my brother Zach, who's my co-founder, had been at Whisky Live in Paris in the fall of 2019, and he had connected with a couple of the distilleries up in Canada. And our attitude towards Canadian whiskey was people have discovered that a lot of really good rye that's either in the U.S. or labeled as American whiskey or labeled as Canadian whiskey. Sometimes they acknowledge that it actually is from Canada. It's really damn good. And our attitude was that people don't really care that it's from Canada. They just want you to be sort of upfront about what it is and how you made it and what's in the bottle. And that's always been our attitude. And that's how we've always approached whiskey. And so we said, what do you think about making what do you guys think about making an old rye whiskey, and just putting on the label where the origin is, just putting it smack dab right there, not just with, it says Origin Canada on it, as you can see, but that was also sort of the origin story of the name Found North. We didn't want to make up some backstory about, grandma's recipe or some crap.
Right.
We're guys who absolutely love whiskey. We think we know a thing or two about it. And we thought, let's just be upfront with people about what it is. And so Found North, obviously we found the whiskey North. We didn't distill this. But the really interesting thing for us was our intent was to make 100% rye. And as you'll see on the grain ratio, and we don't say mash bill, and I'll get to that in a second, but you'll see the grain ratios as 66% rye, 30% corn, 4% malted barley. And what essentially happened was we were working with the distillery, and I wish I could disclose it to you, but it's kind of a non-starter with these guys. You got to sign an NDA, and then down the road, if you're killing it, maybe they'll let you say where it's from.
Sure.
But basically, we were working with this distillery, and we said we want to make this 100% rye, and they sent us 100% rye, and I kept saying, "Wow, this is really good, but it's pretty spicy." And they were like, "No shit, eh?"
That's how it goes, eh?
Yeah, exactly. And finally, like, Canadians are beautifully nice people, particularly at the distilleries up north. But I thought the master blender was going to rip my head off. He finally was just like, "You fucking Americans don't know like what rye actually tastes like. You haven't made it in 100 years, and I'm going to show you how to actually blend this stuff. Let us send you some corn components." And they do this really high proof distillation, high entry proof corn whiskeys that are shockingly delicious. And they sent us a couple that had been aged for 13 years in used oak and then transferred into new oak for an additional 7 years. And we know it as sample 18. That's because, they send these they have these barcodes, right? And you're well, I'm not going to talk about sample, 6A dot 3 dot 4 dot 6 dot, it's just, and so you scribble the numbers on them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Anyway, sample 18, the 18th sample we ever received was just a dream of a whiskey. And we blended it as the 30% corn component with this. And we were just blown away by what we were able to sort of, the way we were able to manipulate the flavors into something that was distinctly American style, right? I mean, you taste this, it tastes like an American rye. It's cask strength, but there are just little rules that we're allowed to bend because we're sourcing from Canada, and that gave it a little extra flair, and that was really what we were going for.
Oh, outstanding, man. So let me back you up just a little bit here. You mentioned earlier that you guys know a thing or two about whiskey, and obviously you do. You're making these great blends. Can we hear a little bit about your whiskey background, how you got into it, and what sort of brought you to, hey, what the hell, let's make a whiskey brand in the middle of a pandemic?
Yeah, yes. So basically, I started by I wanted to start a company before I even started at Gordon's. So John, we were talking beforehand that I started at a liquor store in Boston, Massachusetts, actually in Waltham, Massachusetts, called Gordon's. It's a really old school family owned business. They're awesome. But before that, I was hell bent on starting a whiskey brand or a whiskey company at some point. And this is all the way back in 2014. And so to sort of get my start, because there isn't a sommelier program or things like that. You can't go get a degree in whiskey the way you can do it in wine. And so a friend of my dad said, if you want to get into whiskey, you got to get over to Scotland. And I said, okay. And I booked a flight there. And I basically booked a flight there and a flight back. Didn't book a single hotel. Like, I was 24 years old. And I did 40 distilleries in 30 days. I was hitchhiking Scotland. I was pretending to be a whiskey writer. And I just was drinking like 15 scotches a day and getting and the funniest thing is, if you tell them you're a whiskey writer, they introduce you to the manager, and you get you get a completely different story, you know?
I like it.
And so I basically like just trekked around Scotland learning everything I could. And I sort of parlayed that into a job at Gordon's as kind of the Scotch expert. And of course, Scotch is still a pretty small category, so that broadened into being a whiskey expert. And the main way I sort of learned about whiskey was just going to distilleries. I've probably been to over 100 distilleries easily now. I've probably been to 75 in Scotland. I've been to every distillery in Japan. I've been to most of the distilleries most of the big distilleries in Ireland, all of the big distilleries in Kentucky. And you just go there and take notes. And so that was really, you know, I couldn't tell you more than theoretically how to distill. But I think what's interesting about our background is most people who make whiskey don't have any customer facing experience. And so what's very cool about our company is all of the guys on our team had worked in retail or as brand ambassadors. And so essentially it's been our job to pick whiskey that other people will like. And so that actually translated quite nicely into making our own blends. Now, granted, I was shitting my pants when we launched it, because you get so wrapped up in it that you're like, when you've had the same liquid for 6 months, which is how long it took to blend batch one, you start being like, well, it's better than what I made yesterday, but I have no idea what yesterday's baseline is. And as much as I think I've made something good, I have no idea if anybody's going to like it. So when people did like it, and when it did really well at San Francisco World Spirits Competition, we were blown away and really excited by how well it was received. We gave ourselves 3 months to sell out our Massachusetts allocation. We're like, all right, we'll try to sell into stores, not just and in 8 days we had sold all of it. And we were just like, what the hell? So yeah, it was pretty delightful.
Absolutely outstanding, man. So batch one rye was the first product you rolled out?
Yeah, and it's funny, we rolled out batch two at the same time because it just looks stupid to only have one bottle on the shelf.
Yeah, you want to make sure you can saturate it a little bit.
You know,
right?
It's like, hey, yeah, one bottle. This is it.
This is what we got, man.
This is what we got, you know. And the funny thing was when we made batch one, we basically blended the rye, which was aged in ex-Speyside Scotch casks, actually just Hungarian oak, and a little bit of used wood, and we blended that with sample 18, this corn component. But the really interesting thing about batch two was we had this unbelievably cool rye that had been this 17-year-old rye that had been aged in ex-wheated bourbon barrels, and we were like, we're gonna make 2 ryes. We're a rye company. Like, we had 9 months of building all the, writing all the copy and designing the website, and rye this and rye that, and rye, hit me with a baseball bat. And literally we started blending sample 18 again, this corn component, to balance out the ex-wheated bourbon aged rye, which is just a weird thing to say to begin with. But we started blending these together. And the greater the ratio of corn, the better the whiskey got. And then it got to 50-50. And we were like, fuck, we need to have a meeting. Because we're a self-proclaimed rye company, and we think the best whiskey we can make is probably a majority corn here. And so in the end, our attitude was, we'll just make the best liquid we can make and
Good.
Figure it out from there. And so it ended up being 80% corn, 19% rye, 1% malted barley. And we were like, nobody's going to drink this. because it's a Canadian, you know, we're like, it's not a bourbon, even though it's
Right.
got a bourbon profile. Nobody knows what the hell it is. We didn't know we didn't even know what to call it. It's cask strength whiskey. Because it's basically like, I don't think it actually falls into any of the different categories. And we were just like, whatever, over the years, we'll slowly sell it out. And people liked it even more than batch one. And it's just been flying.
Good.
And so that was like, well, shit. Now we've got to keep making. Now batch 4 is also a corn base, actually. So pretty exciting.
Excellent.
Rock.
Yeah.
That's cool, man. So what I like about this is that we've got a good background on you, on the brand, on the liquid itself. But you mentioned earlier how it's not necessarily a mash bill that you've got disclosed on the label, even though you're giving us full percentages of everything that's in the bottle. Could you dig into that a little bit and just kind of explain to the audience what that is and what the hell we are looking at?
Yeah. So all the time people say like, oh, what's your mash bill? And it's actually different because a mash bill is literally the grain ratio that goes into the mash, right? So if you guys are just in Kentucky, you know how it is. So like they basically are doing, if it's a an OB at Four Roses, it's going to be 60, 35, 5, right? So it's 60% corn, 35% rye, 5% malted barley. They process the grains. They ferment them all together. They mash them, ferment them all together, et cetera, et cetera. So that's your standard mash bill in the U.S. The fundamental difference between Canadian and American whiskey is that the Canadians do 100%, most of the time, actually, they do 100% grains, right? So they'll do 100% corn, and they'll cultivate and add enzymes so that they don't need malted barley.
Yeah.
And they will basically process the grain, distill it, age it exclusively as 100%. They'll do the same with rye. They'll do the same with wheat. Sometimes they actually even do the same with single malt, with barley. And then at the end, they blend it together. And so the reason why it's so important and why that we sort of emphasize grain ratio as opposed to calling it a mash bill is because if you were to take a ton of corn and you were to take a ton of rye and distill them, basically ferment and distill them separately, you'll get almost twice as much alcohol from the corn as you do from the rye, because the starch content in the corn is so much higher, right? So that the available sugar is much higher in corn, and so the alcohol yield is so much higher. So when you look at like a mash bill of, say, 70% corn, 30-ish% rye, or 25% rye, however you want to do it, you're only a much smaller proportion of the final liquid is actually rye. So when we say that our whiskey is 66% rye, that's actually by liquid, right? That's by liquid alcohol. That's not by tonnage of grain. And so it's a subtle difference, but it makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference from a flavor standpoint with something like batch 2, right? Where batch 2 is 80% corn and it's 19% rye. And so in a mash bill, that would be what, like a medium to medium rye mash bill, somewhere in there. Maybe somebody might call it a little high rye, but it's actually much, much higher rye. Mm-hmm. It would equate to like a 30% rye for bourbon, or even a little bit higher than that, maybe like a 35%, which is what's super fun about this whiskey, because batch 2 is what I'm sipping on, by the way, because when you nose it and taste it, the corn and all the caramel and everything that we like about bourbon is really coming through. But there is a very like hefty rye presence on the grain, on the liquid.
I love that. I mean, I think it's cool. I really like this batch 2 is what I'm sipping now too. I think it's, something you said back there kind of resonated when you're like, oh shit, we got to change our branding, but we want to make the best liquid that we can make. I think that, that's really what it's about. There's a lot of places that prioritize branding over the quality. I'd rather say quality any day. That leads me to a question I have, which, big fans of whiskey, big nerds of, whiskey, know Canadian rye, like it has its profile. We've got Alberta rye coming from some great producers that we love, but what unique marketing challenge does that present to just the general consumer? Like, hey, because when you talk to a consumer, and you say I got Canadian whiskey, the only thing they think of is Crown Royal, right? You know, and whether
Yep.
they love it, they hate it, they got real fucking sick on it in
and
college.
how much shit is added to it
Yeah.
and whatnot.
Everyone's got an opinion, but how do you sell the public on Canadian whiskey?
Yeah, and I think it's a great question because particularly batch 2. Batch 1 is easy, right? It's a 16-year-old rye, and people know that rye is coming from Canada. They see its cask strength. But I think a lot of what we try to do is tip our hat to American whiskey consumers, particularly guys who are on this feed, right? Like the guys who are hanging out on Tuesday night at 9:25, p.m., like listening to people talk about whiskey. They know what the fuck they're talking about. Like, don't try to get something past them. You know what I mean? Tell them what it is and they'll listen. And so for us, like, we put in the origin, the grain, the maturation, no additives, right? A lot of Canadian whiskey has additives. So like, it's like absolutely no additives. We give you the batch number, the bottle number, right? Like, we did the wax top. And the wax top for me was really important. I have no eye for design. I think the label is beautiful. I had fucking nothing to do with it. The boys on our team really crushed it. But the only thing we kept having these meetings, and it's like, should we move this a little bit this way or this, that? And I was like, I don't know, but do we have a wax top? Because I just think that there's a sort of thing that says like, hey, American whiskey drinkers, we actually made this for you. Like, yes, it's Canadian, but we're Americans making Canadian whiskey for you.
Right.
And it is aligned with your profile and it's aligned with your ethos. We're transparent. We make, and really honestly, like, get it in their glass, because we make a feisty big boy rye, right? I mean, this isn't, you taste this and you're like, oh, they meant business. They really wanted to bring the spicy noise. This isn't Crown Royal watered down. As much as, if the Crown Royal people are listening, like, don't kill me. I love you. You guys make plenty of good products, but it's not Crown, right? We're not making Crown. This is a different species.
It totally is, man. I really dig this ride too, actually. Jay, do you have both of these poured? Do you want to taste through some of these and talk about them a little bit?
Yeah, why don't we hit, so I've got the whiskey because I just wanted to point out the design. I don't know if this is going to render nicely, but if you like maps, this has a really kind of cool topographical layout to it, which is unique. I've never seen a bottle with it. I have the rye poured myself. It's the lighter label. Why don't we, now that we've kind of dug into what it is, I have my first pour of this one, so this is probably a great one to talk about. And I don't know, rye. You said big boy rye, and that's got me going. So,
yeah, that resonates for sure. I mean, like you said, this is an enthusiast product, so this is cask strength. It's giving you all the information up front. It's in a sexy wax top bottle, if that's your thing.
Mm-hmm.
But realistically, it doesn't really matter until you pour this thing into a glass and you try it. And I threw some of these ahead of time into the glass and started tasting through them just as we were getting into the green room. And I think my first words I tried the cask strength whiskey first, and then I hit the rye second. And I think my first impression of the rye was very, very similar to what you just said, except I was probably swearing a little bit more. And I probably said something like, hey, holy shit, this is fucking nice rye. Like, this is really, really,
oh yeah,
just like big rock candy sweetness right up front with like a whole big old punch of spice right behind it, man. That corn is working in there nicely. Like, everything about this is coming through in a way that I really dig.
Thank you, man. That means a lot. Yeah, the funny thing is, like, I can't tell you how good it is to hear people like something you made. It really it hits the spot, and it makes you want to get. We've been just busting our asses on batch 3 and batch 4, and we've just become more and more perfectionist about it, because we're just like, you're exactly right. You can do all the labeling right. You can get the age statement right. You can tip your hat to the right people, but the stuff better be fucking good, right? Like, period.
Yeah, right.
And with this, what was extremely fun about working with these products was these I should say lots, because basically, like, the way it works is, and what's fun about the way we make the whiskey is, the distillery usually would make the whiskey for a brand, They'd say, what do you want? And then they'd blend it and send it to you. And we said, that's not going to work for us. We actually had them send lots to us, and then we blended it, to very, very exact specifications. Because when they blend for you, they're going, all right, let's move this by 10 percentage points here or 10 percentage points there. And when we're doing it, we're moving it by a half a percentage point here and a half a percentage point there. And what was particularly cool about making this whiskey was the rules that we're breaking that I was talking about earlier. The number one is that we don't have to put things immediately in new oak, right? Which, like, new oak is awesome. Don't get me wrong. And the corn component was finished for 7 years in new oak. So like there's plenty of new oak flavor on here, but over a 13-year period of aging in used oak, you actually get a lot of oxidation, which develops a lot of like really interesting fruity top notes. But at the same time, this was this was spicy, right? Because it's such a high percentage of rye and it's such a high concentration of rye. And so for me, when I have a good whiskey, you have great whiskeys where you taste it, you put it down and you say, all right, well, that was great, but what's next, right? For us, when we made this, our goal was for you to taste it and go, oh man, that's big spice. And then go back and go, wait a second, I'm getting some fruit and some sweetness on this. Like, crap, I finished my glass and I want to pour another. Sure. I want to just go back to it. And really, I thought we were able to do that, not to just like, but I thought we were able to get a multi-layered whiskey that really makes you want to come back to it and see what else is in there.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, it's good to be proud of what you made of. Blending is not easy. John and I have had the privilege and the luxury and the opportunity to blend a bunch of things in recent months, and like it is not workless work. People are like, oh, that must be fun, but like after like hours sits at your spreadsheet, you're just like, I'll make it end. But
right.
That leads me to my final question of the night. And then, but so what I'll just take COVID right off the table. Yeah, we know COVID, that's your easy pocket answer. But what's the biggest challenge in just kind of bringing this to consumers? What's the biggest challenge in blending whiskey and bringing it to consumers?
The biggest challenge in blending whiskey is palate fatigue. Okay. You have all these lots and you think like, hey, this is going to be easy. I'm just going to throw paint at the wall and see what sticks. And then you make something one afternoon and you try it in the morning. You're like, what was I thinking? This sucks. And so really, we were talking about a trip to Four Roses. I interviewed Brent Elliott years ago on how he makes small batch limited edition. And we basically copycatted the interview. I mean, literally it was like, okay, this is how he does it. So this is how we're going to do it. Okay. But the hardest thing about bringing it to consumers is, I think it's not being there physically in person. Okay. And I know that's COVID and that's the thing. It is actually an advantage though, because in some ways, because people like to learn about whiskey and they're really interested in whiskey, and because they can't do, if Diageo and Pernod and all of these guys are doing tastings every day, it's tricky to sort of like butt your way into the important accounts. And we've had a lot of fun doing live streams and being able to reach a much broader audience than probably otherwise would have been accessible to us. But damn, it's hard to like, as somebody who's done a lot of tastings with a crowd.
Yeah,
it's really like you say something, you think you're funny and you just have no fucking clue because you're not getting reactions, and like you can't tell, like I don't know if people are drinking our stuff and going, oh, what the hell, or if they're like, oh yeah, I'm into this, you know what I mean? Yeah. It's like it's very difficult to try to just turn on your computer in my shitty basement and like try to sell people on some fucking project that we started in our, literally we did all the blends with the entire blend team, never being in the same fucking room.
Okay.
Right? Like that's ridiculous.
Project, basically.
Like sending, we would blend stuff and like one of our guys lives in New York and he's got a brilliant palate, Sammy Karachi, one of our partners. And like I would blend something and have to overnight it to him. and be like, what do you think of this? You know what I mean? And it's like, it is not
Yeah, you
not
can't slack a whiskey
conducive to
channel. Like,
collaboration.
you can't
Yeah.
slack a
Yeah.
whiskey sample.
Yeah.
Well, that's amazing. I love it. I think it's cool. You get to go to all these places at one time, but it's hard too. Even on the internet, you can only be in one place at once. You
Yep.
can't, letting your product speak for itself when you can't be there. Because like you guys have a cool store, you have a great delivery. Like the passion is clearly there, but at the end of the day, the bottle and the material has to talk, and it has to be the one to kind of grab that consumer off the shelf.
Yeah, for sure. For
Cool,
sure.
man. Well, this is super delicious. I love this. This reminds me of some of my favorite Whistle Pig single cast that, kind of other big elephant Canadian rye on the market. But if people, here we've tasted the cast strength rye and the cast strength whiskey. If people are looking for more from Found North, if they're looking for more about your story, if they're quite frankly looking to buy your products, where can they find you?
Actually, if you go to foundnorthwhiskey.com, one of the fun things about one of the fun things about COVID, no, but one of the fun things about this sort of the situation is that people are a little more they're a little more willing to buy stuff online, and there's a service that will allow us to ship to about 40 states.
Okay.
So if you're in Boston, you can go to a few stores and maybe pick it up. We're in stores in California, we're in stores in New York. But if you happen to not be near somebody that has it, or you're in a different state, there's a really good chance that you can just order it online at foundnorthwhiskey.com. There are a handful of states, as you guys probably know, that are just like, the shipping is impossible.
Right.
So sorry to everybody who's in Illinois, and like sorry to everybody who's in a few states in the South. I didn't do it. But
Someday.
but
Someday.
yeah, someday. And the last thing I'd say is like, email me. Email me at nick@foundnorthwhiskey.com. Or at Founders, or if you go on our website, we advertise our emails. Like, I'll answer any questions. We actually love it. It's our favorite thing is when people are like, hey, like, what'd you do with this, or why'd you do this, or whatever it is. We that's it for us. We actually love that part. So,
Man, that's great. It's hard to find brands that want to talk to customers who aren't, in a store ready to buy. I think that's really cool. So
I called a guy today. He emailed me and was like, hey, I can't get your product. Like, I'm really bummed about it. I really want it. And he happened to email me with his cell phone number, and I called his cell phone, and he was like, who's this? I was like, this is Nick Taylor at Found North. Like, I make the stuff. And he was just like, he literally just goes, what the fuck? Like, I was just like, what? And I was like, hey man, like, I actually know a store nearby you. Like, I can hook you up. I know the guy will actually, ship it to you. And just like, he was just blown away. And I was like, yes, that is what we do.
Yes,
Like,
that
please
is our
give us a
level
call.
of customer service.
that
Yes,
is
we
excellent.
like
I mean,
that.
and it makes whiskey personal again, right? Like there's all
Right.
these conglomerates, like, I mean, Diageo, conglomerates rule the world, and that's cool. They have their value, but the personal touch, it can't be overstated.
Whiskey is it's actually fundamentally about the community that it creates. And so like we value that, I think, more than anything. So we want to be a part of it. We're really excited that you guys had us on, and I really can't thank you enough, guys.
Well, killer, my friend. It has been great to
Outstanding.
have you. We love doing things with the whiskey community. If you're looking for more from John, you can find him over at the the Bourbon Finder, the weekly whiskey Bourbon Finder.
Wherever.
Mash all those words together. He's over at the Bourbon Finder, both on Instagram, on his website. I am Jay from whiskeyraiders.com, where your Rotten Tomatoes of whiskey news. We've got lots of reviews, all the fun stuff. We like to do aggregation. Data is kind of my soft spot. And together we are Weekly Whiskey. So find us here on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Thursdays, we have a great after hours dropping and a little bit of bonus content too. And if you like what we do, go ahead and support us at patreon.com/thewhiskeynet. And if you like how we sound, go ahead and check on Mackie Audio. They are the audio sponsor for Weekly Whiskey. And quite frankly, we're having a good time. So thanks for joining us, everyone. Thank you, Nick. We'll see you in the green room, and check out some spicy big boy rye, because he's not messing around.
Cheers,
Cheers, guys.
Cheers, everyone.